Welcome to the supernatural shore, to the liminal place where land meets sea, and to the strange world of the superstitious seafarer. With over 20,000 documented shipwrecks around Scotland's coasts, is it any wonder that sailors and fishermen held strange beliefs and customs in a bid to try to control the wind, the weather, and the sea itself? It all begun with the building of a boat, for no one wanted to go to sea in a great big coffin. Oak was a woody choice due to its strength, but also could withstand the devil's lightning. A small piece of rowan was placed in the hull to protect those on a voyage for witches, demons, and the devil. All manner of rituals were carried out at every part of the building of the boat. When it was finished, on larger ships they used figureheads of half-naked women, believing that the sight of their breasts would shame the sea and keep it calm. On smaller boats, eyes were sometimes painted to prevent them being lost at sea. For the same reason, a boat would never be painted in blue, for the gods might not find her if she was lost out in the open oceans. And although we refer to boats as she, you'd ne'er gie a boat a female name, for the spirit of the boat might get jealous. Once given, a name should ne'er be changed or uttered afore the boat touched water. For the spirit of the boat, it might wake up early, and if it proved troublesome, why boats were often burned before they were even launched. No one wanted to sail on a doomed vessel. According to the old superstitions, nothing connected to the sea should e'er be done on a Friday, for that is the day when the sea is at its cruelest and the gods are least merciful. To sail on a Friday the 13th, why that would be to risk life and limb. Only a fool would take to sea on that day. It was believed that it was bad luck to hae women on board a ship, for a woman to come to wave farewell at the docks, and even for a sailor to pass a woman as he was walking to his boat. In those days, it was better for a woman to stay upon dry land. For if out at sea, and any misfortune happened, why they would surely be blamed. And there were many instances where women were flung overboard to calm a storm. It was also considered unlucky to hae a priest on board, for his presence it might attract the malevolent attention of the devil. And it also suggests why that the crew are ready for a funeral. Floors wearing black and coffins were not allowed on boats for the same reason. But the worst Jonahs of all were nuns. During the 100 Years' War, 60 were once flung overboard to placate a tempest. You would never say the word storm at sea, for that might invoke one. The word pig was banned. In fact, a Scottish fisherman, he wouldn't even go out in his boat if he passed in on the way to the harbour, believing that they were marked by the devil on the hoof. You would never say words like fox, weasel, rabbit, or hare, for that might conjure a witch, the arch enemy of the seafarer, for they could create deadly storms. And you would never say, good luck on your voyage, for that would have the opposite effect in a sailor, where he would have to cut himself and shed his blood to counteract that ill fortune. But there were many lucky things that seafarers had. They would hang hagstones to the bow of the boat. They would nail a horseshoe to the mast. In fact, anything made of iron was considered maist lucky. And if there was none to touch when you needed it, why, you could always shout out, "Cold iron, cold iron." Sailors would throw money overboard in the hope that the sea would fill their pockets with more. A fisherman would throw back the first fish caught in the hope that he would be rewarded with a good catch. But the luckiest thing of all to hae on board a boat was the cull of a newborn baby, a membrane that sometimes covers a child's head at birth. This has long been treasured as a protective amulet by seafarers, perhaps a cause it appears to save a child in the womb from drowning. And even today, they change hands for surprising amounts of money. Tattoos were used to mark a sailor's achievement, but were also symbols of good luck. An anchor would save you from drowning. A naked lady would have the same effect as a figurehead and calm the seas. Having hold and fast tattooed across the knuckles, why, that could help a sailor to head on to the ropes during a storm. A crucifix under each foot, why, that could prevent a shark from biting. Yin on the back, reduce the pain of a flogging. But the luckiest tattoo to hae was that o' a swallow, for swallows always find their way home. But it wasn't just witches, demons, or the devil, or the winds that sailors were afeard of. It was all the monsters that lurked in its depths, such as a terrible kraken, whales as big as islands, giant squid with tentacles 100 feet long, and the terrible blue men of the Minch and the Outer Hebrides. There were so many ways that somebody could die at sea that few sailors even bothered learning to swim, believing that the sea got to decide who lived and who died. In fact, if you fell overboard, your shipmates, why, they wouldn't make much of an effort to save you. For they believed that once the sea got a taste of you, it would be hungry for more, that you'd be living on borrowed time, for the sea would be watching and waiting for her chance. And why, that would put the whole crew at risk. If you did die at sea, the eyes of the corpse must be closed, for if the left eye remained open, it would look for someone to take with it to a watery grave. Bodies were sewn into large canvas shrouds. The final stitch placed through the nose to ensure that they were truly dead and they wouldn't walk the ship at night. The shrouds were weighted so they wouldn't float or follow. 3 shots were fired at committal to scare away the devil and all that. Why, it had to be done with the utmost haste, for a crew might mutiny at the prospect of carrying a dead body. a taboo that lasted well into the 19th century. In fact, there were many documented cases where bodies were caught in nets and just simply flung back to the sea. In the olden days, it was law in Scotland for fishermen to wear gold earrings, so as if they fell overboard and were washed ashore, they would hae the money to pay for a burial. The trouble was, anybody that washed ashore, aside fishing communities, was usually left where it was, for folk were feared that if they took something for the sea might claim their life in exchange. So the story that I'd like to share with you is my version, a traditional tale that comes from Shetland, the birthplace of my great-granny. I've called it Sailor's Ghost. One grey, stormy day, a man was out walking to see if the wind had brought some precious wood ashore, when he spotted a large bundle at the bottom of an inlet. He climbed down to hae a look. To his horror, he discovered it was a partially decomposed human corpse. He left it where it was, and he ran off to the harbour to get help. He returned with a group of men, and they argued about what should be done with the body. For in those days, men had great respect for the power of the sea. They made their living by it and didn't want to anger the sea gods. So they decided to bury it where it was found. They moved some of the rocks to create a shallow grave and put the corpse inside. They could tell by what it was wearing that it was once a seaman, for he had 2 golden earrings in his left ear and a brightly coloured neckerchief containing a small bundle tied around his throat. Well, they knew that the earrings were to pay for a burial, but they didn't need money for a coffin or a priest or a cross. And they daren't touch it or look inside the neckerchief, for to steal for the deed, that was one of the worst crimes that anyone could commit. So they placed rocks on top of his corpse and hurriedly took their leave. After that day, they got on with their lives. Well, all except the man who had found the corpse. Each night, he was troubled by a ghastly apparition. He would be awakened by a terrible moaning. "Help me! Help me!" Afore the dripping, wet, decomposed corpse appeared afore his eyes, complaining that the place that it was buried was wet and uncomfortable, asking the man to bury him in somewhere better, saying that he could have his golden earrings and the gold that was tied and the handkerchief around his neck. But the terrified man, he held up his Bible, shouting, "Go away, spirit, take your leave." But the spirit wouldn't leave the man in peace. Night after night he appeared, until the man agreed to help. But he was also afraid of angering the sea gods. To appease them, he dug a trench where the body lay, so the water for the crags would flow around the grave and run out to sea. He placed a wooden cross on the grave and said some prayers for the man's soul. Well, that must have appeased the ghost, for he never seen it again, and later that night he found 2 golden earrings on the table aside his bed, and heard a whispered, "Thank you." Some say that the body of the sailor still lies there in a rocky grave. But unless you want to anger the gods of the sea, that is where it should lay, to be left in peace. And that is the story of the sailor's ghost. So if you're out at sea and break any of these ancient rules, and there's no iron to touch, you can always shout to, "Cold iron, cold iron,